Order at 6:04 on, I can read my watch, the 6th of August. Everyone, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen. So we have a very light agenda for this evening. A couple of items that will go very quickly. Where is the,
Okay, so
that's it?
your
The numbers from,
agenda.
okay, it's weird they start with number 2. So, on the agenda, we are simply going to start by answering some resident questions regarding LNG slash NEC development. We're not taking questions. This is specifically to provide answers to questions that were emailed into the board and to make them available to the public. We will be wrapping that up very quickly, followed by some appointments to the newly formed LNG committee. That will also probably only take about a minute or two. And then we are going into the interview firms for town administrator search. 5, consider appointment, vote of search firm. 6, audit for fiscal 1921. And then the next meeting recommendation will go in order. So the first thing we're going to do, and I'm actually not going to read the entire thing because it's 16 pages long. I am simply going to let everyone know that due to some emails we received and our desire to make sure that everything was in full view of the public and the answers were provided, the Selectmen's office has pulled a history of LNG discussions. It's 16 pages long. This document is available to anyone who wants it from our office. There are some copies here this evening. But for all intents and purposes, the document clearly demonstrates that the LNG discussion has been very public-facing as far back as 2016, has involved various members of multiple boards, including the Board of Selectmen, the EDC, and Planning. And not only do we know that the Select Board has recently offered its assistance to Planning, which was not taken up, but the history will also show that this board offered its assistance to Planning as far back as 2016 and was told by the then Planning Director to stay out of it and let Planning handle it. That is all in this document, and it is available for anybody who'd like it. The next item on the agenda is appointments to LNG Committee. Mr. Boyer, I'm sorry, Ms. Craven.
No, Mr. Boyer has provided the board with a list of names he is asking the board to appoint to the LNG committee. You have already made your appointments for the Board of Selectmen, which is Bill Borowski and John McGrath as the alternate. That is done. You have before you the Board of Health, John Sanborn, the Board of Assessors, Dick Vaughn, ZBA, Frank Lombardi, and Water Sewer Commission, Rob Lemansky. The Conservation Commission is in the process of naming a member, but Mr. Boyer would like to be able to call a meeting together once the appointments are made, and I believe they've already scheduled a meeting for tomorrow night.
Through the chair,
Mr. McGrath.
I make a motion that we appoint Mr. Sanborn, Mr. Vaughn, Mr. Lombardi, and Mr. Rob Lemansky to the LNG committee.
Second for discussion?
So we have a motion and a second for discussion. Comments, Mr.
Yeah.
Borowski?
Can you let Mrs.
Yeah,
Boyer
what was
talk
that?
a minute?
Oh, Pete, there you go.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Real quick, I believe the only amendment to make to that would be Mr. Vaughn was not voted to represent the Board of Assessors at a formal meeting. All the other people on that list were voted at meetings of their respective boards to be their delegates. So I'd ask that just the Conservation delegate and also the Board of Assessors delegate just be held off until those respective boards can have their meetings and vote to appoint which member they would like to represent them on the committee.
Okay, so I will rescind my motion,
Say yep, absolutely.
okay? And I will make the motion that we appoint Mr. John Sanborn from the Board of Health, Mr. Frank Lombardi from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and Mr. Rob Lemansky from the Water Sewer Commission to the LNG committee.
What about Patsy Ridlack from
Yeah,
Planning Board?
that was my discussion question. Patsy's not on the list, so, but I'm assuming that was just oversight.
I just
Patsy-
copied the list.
Patsy's supposed to be on it.
Sorry.
So would you amend that?
Planning,
Yeah.
yes, so Ms. Ridlack from Planning Board.
And I will add Ms. Ridlack to planning to that
Thank you.
motion.
And second, and with that, I have no other discussion.
So that'll give us 5 members, more than a quorum, so we can continue to meet tomorrow
Yep.
and get the process rolling. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Just-
to everybody serving on the committee.
And just a question for
With the
clarification.
full amendment.
I think the chairman had mentioned there's an alternate Do we also have to vote on their alternate, or no?
For planning?
To be, like we have John being the alternate for
Yeah,
what's
it's,
selectmen?
So
yeah,
if
yeah, I
they
think you mentioned
put
Patsy and
people
Jean, right?
forward,
Did they
They
designate
have
one?
it designated.
Not every committee delegated an alternate, so,
Okay, but they
Just
could if
like
they
Jim.
wanted to.
correct. But this will give us the start to move forward, so, thank you.
Any, any other comments or discussion or questions for Peter?
No, I'm good.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.
All those in
Thank you.
favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries unanimously.
Excellent.
Peter, thank you.
Thank you.
Everything you're doing is very appreciated,
Yeah, seriously.
and the experience is invaluable.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
and that's it. for-
Ms. Craver, number 4, which is actually number 3.
Um, Let me ask you if we can do the other ones up first, and then we'll go into our interview. And
Sure.
I believe Drew was going to be leaving.
Okay, so
So
what do
if
you
we
want to
can
do?
do the
Jump to,
audit?
6?
FY 19 to 21, I had sent you an email asking for people to take a look at. So you've seen the proposal already. I'm asking you to authorize me to contract for another 3 years with our auditor. I do believe this is going to be his last year, and I would recommend after this that you go out for a full bid, but I think it's going to be important to have that institutional memory.
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, I completely agree with Rob in that with this type of information, knowing that we haven't had any issues, overall we're in good health, all the reports have looked fine, having that, again, I think you said it nicely, institutional knowledge that we can leverage, at least for me, would be great to do. And then, again, we can always reassess, but knowing we're in a, just, shall we call, period of transition, I think the more knowledge that we can keep, the better off we'll be, at least in the short to medium term. So with that, I would make a motion that we accept, authorize Rob, the TA, to move forward with the contract proposal for Auditor Freeher.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
No.
No.
Thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries unanimously. Thank you,
Okay.
Ms. Craver.
Thank you. All right.
So we are
Drew's all
done
set.
with 1, 2, 6. All right, go to number 4.
Are you keeping cable, I'm just checking, doing a check, because you had talked about cable stopping, and you want to keep it going.
No, I mean, I
It's up to
didn't,
you.
it was an off night. I just didn't realize he'd be here at all. He's welcome to stay.
All right, let's keep
Broadcast to
going.
your heart's delight, Drew. It's up to you.
We're not going live, we're just recording.
That's
Okay,
fine.
perfect.
Okay.
All right, I'm
Yeah, Drew,
just,
I don't think it's gonna, and no offense to our guest, I don't think it's gonna take a ton of time. But every time I say that, it's gonna take 2 hours.
Unless Bill drags it out.
okay, so we have here with us Tom Grew and Rick White. Jessica is also here from the HR. Rick and Tom, if, through the chair, if you guys want to come up. Jessica had prepared some questions for you. You should have those in your packet.
Try to get rid of these as much as I can.
Oh, smooth.
They're no good in your pocket.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go, you're welcome.
How's everybody?
Good, you?
So, might I suggest, before you go into the questions, to give them an opportunity to just talk a little bit about themselves?
Sure. Thank you for coming tonight.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to submit a proposal to search for a new administrator. I'm Tom Grew of the Grew White team. I started Grew Associates after I retired. I took a somewhat early retirement as a town manager from Chatham, Massachusetts. And decided I wanted to do some consulting, recruiting, organizational studies for towns, charter studies, charter work. So I started off in that vein. My own experience is primarily as a town manager, administrator in a number of states. I ended up in Massachusetts, mostly because my wife is from Massachusetts, and
Good reason.
I decided the best thing for my marriage was to make sure she got back to Massachusetts. And we did that, and I became the first town manager in Winchester, and stayed there for about, I'm guessing, 12, 14 years, and then went to Middlesex Community College as the Dean of Administration and Finance. And when the president of the college retired, I got back into town management in Duxbury as a first-time manager in Duxbury. And after 5 years and 6 years, I guess, in Duxbury, I ended up in Chatham as a first-time manager. I seemed to enjoy being the first. And because when you're the first and you do something stupid, you just tell people, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. So I succeeded in each of those towns. About, 5 years ago, I convinced Rick White, who was at that time, town administrator in Dennis, that he should take an early retirement. And he said he would if we could hook up together and restart the firm as White Associates. Rick and I go back a few years. He was my assistant in Winchester, and he was the one that got things done when I would intend to let paperwork pile up. Rick would be the one to pull the paper out and sign my name to it and get it going. But we've had a successful relationship as Grow White, doing recruiting, and we're going to let Rick explain a little bit about his own background and how we go about conducting a recruitment.
As Tom said, my name is Rick White. I spent 40 years as a manager in Massachusetts. Unlike Tom, I grew up in Massachusetts, and I stayed here. Lost my accent in graduate school when none of the students sitting next to me could understand me. So I had to pronounce my R's where they belong and don't put them where they didn't belong. I worked in a variety of communities. Currently, right now, I'm finishing up an interim position in Princeton, which has been an eye-opener for me. It's exposed me to the Worcester area and some of the managers here. It's been very fortuitous for recruiting purposes because, I've gotten to know some managers I didn't necessarily know working in the greater Boston area. As a firm, Grew Associates and then Grew White have been together for about 20 years. Done over 100 recruitments, and each recruitment that we've done, the person that we've helped other boards select have lasted longer than the useful life of most managers, the shelf life. We provide a unique 18-month guarantee that if we recommend someone for the position and they don't work out within 18 months, we'll go and do the recruitment for you for free. We believe in our process. We believe it's different. We don't churn them out, our recruitment. We take our time. We only do so many per year, and we think we're very careful about it. We spend most of our time working and digging deep in terms of defining what the community needs and wants, and we do it methodically and carefully. We try to interview all the department heads and community leaders that you suggest to us. Given your recent history, it would seem important that we interview a lot of those community leaders, given their interest in participating and their interest in the position. We try to develop a synthesis of the feedback that we receive, and then we sit down with each individual selectman and review the synthesis and get their feedback and begin developing a recruitment strategy. So we spend hours just interviewing people and trying to define the position. We're also available to do a job description for you. Given the trust that Robin's had here and her performance, I'm sure you've delegated a lot of responsibility to her. And some of it's been informal and some of it's by the policies that you have on your website, and perhaps a bylaw or two. But with a new person, you're probably going to want to have some clear definition about what the roles are and what to expect. So we will do that for you as part of the service in terms of the recruitment. It helps us help you find the right person for you. Hopefully, you'll be able to find someone who's been able to grow, who will be able to grow in the position as Robin did and take on more and more responsibilities as she's become, or he becomes more and more familiar with the job. Examples of the synthesis we included in our packet, they're pretty detailed and pretty thorough. From there, we begin to define a salary range and benefits competitive in the area. We spend a lot of time talking to you to try to figure out what your strategy is going to be, where you want to be compared to your competition. And from there, we have all the data we need to begin a recruitment and develop a recruitment brochure. Our recruitment brochure really is more of an advertisement for us. We do most of our work in the field. Both Tom and I spent a lot of time in Massachusetts, have a lot of connections in Massachusetts. I am accumulating more now, having worked in the Worcester area. Once we define the position, we start searching hard for the right person. We find that most people we recruit for the job don't apply directly by some advertisement we put in the ICMA newsletter, or the MMA newsletter. Most of them are actually recruited by us based on how we define the job, how we get to know you, how we get to know the community, and how we think the fit is. I think there's a lot to be said about Charlton and what it has to offer the next town administrator, and I think it would be a fairly decent and easy recruit. We try to keep confidentiality for all of the applicants. We ask them to submit their applications to us. Many of the people that we ask to apply for jobs already have jobs. And as you know, everything they do in the final stage is public, but we guard very jealously their identity and their confidentiality during the process. So we husband all the resumes, and we do the initial review and culling of the resumes based on whether or not they meet the qualifications or not. We will then work with your screening committee. I'm assuming that you're going to have a screening committee. Both Tom and I have worked with screening committees for years. I'm a trained facilitator, so I can help in some difficult spots. Then as the applications come in, we will sort qualified versus unqualified, and then try to narrow the field down to about 8 people to refer to the screening committee. Our work isn't flawless. We do miss an occasional candidate that the community thinks is worthy of an interview, so we submit all of the resumes to the screening committee and have them review them as well. And you know, the screening committee has its own responsibilities and can pick their own people, but we try to at least set the tone for them. We have about 40 to 50 questions that we have available for the committee to look at, to review. They're general questions. Once they pick the questions, we try to take advantage of their knowledge of the town and our knowledge of the town and craft the question in a way that's specific to Charlton. From there, you know, we basically help the committee. We attend all of their meetings, facilitate their meetings, schedule the interviews, chaperone the interviews in and out. We make sure that none of the candidates see each other. We always look for a room or a building that is discreet in town, that has multiple offices, and we can have a candidate go early to an interview and park themselves in an office while the other person's interviewing, and then we'll come out and get them. Again, confidentiality is really important to us. We help the screening committee. We do some preliminary reference checks, background checks on the candidates as the interviews are going on and as they're interviewing. The closer it gets to the selectmen, the more intimate knowledge we have about the candidates and their background. And we try to have the screening committee recommend 3 to 4 finalists for the board to consider. Once the finalists have been identified and given permission to get their names released to the public, we provide the same staff support to the selectmen, choreograph and schedule the meetings, work with you on the questions that are most helpful to you and are there as a resource for you. Some communities like to have the candidates be acquainted with the community. In some cases, we've facilitated a forum for candidates. We've salted the meeting with some questions to start a tone for the meeting, and then turned it over to the public to answer to have the candidates answer questions. I don't know what your situation is here, or whether it's something you'd like to do, but it's available to you if you want.
I like that idea.
There's no right or wrong. Communities like it, some communities like it, some don't. We generally suggest that sometime in the process that you allow the department heads to see the candidates, to ask them questions, become familiar with them. We ask the department heads to be careful to not rank the candidates, that their biases will come through when you ask them for feedback, but not to rank them and not to position you. We do the same thing with the selection committee. We will give you a write-up of each candidate, their references, their strengths, what we see their growth areas are, but we try very hard to understand that it's your selection and that we need to do everything that we can do to position you to pick the candidate that fits you the best. In terms of negotiations, some communities like their town council to do the negotiations. We think we can help you and as being a liaison with the candidate. Sometimes negotiations, there can be some miscommunication, some misunderstanding. Having someone that the candidate has some familiarity and trust with to break down some miscommunication or misinformation can be helpful. So we try to stay involved in that with you as well, right up to the selection point.
Questions from the board?
So many.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
So you have a long list of questions. Generally, when you do interviews, we recommend that you interview everyone and go through the same list. As you know, on the, I'm just trying to figure out how to say this.
Do you want me to
But
read all the
it's actually, no, it's actually on the thing that the second candidate has withdrawn.
Mhm.
So you most likely will not be asking all the same questions. So what you could do is just take a look at some of these questions. Pick the ones that are important to you, and maybe for time-wise, either do follow-up questions with them on what they've already done, said, or to pick some of the questions that you'd like to do. We did, so let me say you did receive more. You ranked them down to 2 that you wanted to interview, the number 2 person. The other one withdrew, so you are going to have your meeting with this company.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, then. Please bear with us.
Sure.
You want me to start there? Because you know I'll be the longest.
You will. Go ahead, Bill.
Gentlemen, first of all, thank you for coming out. We start with a couple, I'm actually going off list, to be honest with you. How do you differ, or do you differ at all, when recruiting candidates for a town administrator position versus a town manager position? And knowing the delta between those two when it comes to responsibilities, and, I think as you said nicely, Robin's obviously a very experienced TA, so I think this board and prior boards have leveraged her experience on that. But knowing that there truly is, be a charter, be a bylaw, et cetera, a difference between TA versus TM, how do you reconcile those when you are recruiting?
Well, every recruitment we have is different, and we cater it to the community, not to us. That's why we invest so many resources in the interviewing process and interviewing the department heads and the community leaders. And then bringing back that feedback to the selectmen so that we can begin to define a profile for what it is that you want. There is a distinction between town manager and town administrator. And there is a distinction between some town administrators that have bylaws or special acts and a community like yours that just goes by Chapter 41, Section 13A, is it?
I think that's it.
In which you delegate responsibility to the town administrator and they act on your behalf. Generally, our experience is that that's an iterative process. It'll really depend on what feel that you have for the candidates, how connected you are, how much faith you have in their experience, what you think they can do, and how much you think you can trust them in the beginning, and we can help you with that. We think we help you with that with the work that we do up front, but we continue to do the work with the screening committee, give you feedback from what we see with the screening committee, and do the same when you go through the interview process. So by the time you hire the new town administrator, you've clearly defined what it is what relationship you want and what type of role you want them to play, at least initially in the community.
Yeah, because I think that individualized approach is going to be important, at least for myself, and I would assume other members of the board, as for all intents and purposes, I'd be looking to re-baseline roles and responsibilities to say what is legally allowed, what has been delegated, and where is that line that we want to say, okay, maybe we draw it back a little bit now, based upon that it is going to be somebody new. So again, I think as we speak more, or, as things progress, obviously that would be like a huge piece of my interest.
The distinction between town manager and town administrator can be deceptive. My own experience has been, because I've also served as an interim administrator or manager, the role of the town administrator can sometimes be more difficult if they don't have the same charter or ordinance or bylaw authority that a manager has. And they sometimes need to have more people skills as administrator, because they need to persuade their department staff that this is a good idea, or be able to understand where the staff is coming from and work well with them. And I've seen too many managers just assume that they can say, this is the way we're going to do it because the charter says I've got that authority. Right. And those are the managers that I think you want to be careful. You recognize that maybe they're not going to be a good fit in your community. Exactly. So the titles are deceptive. The roles can be significantly different.
I had a question, but did you have a comment?
I did, and I told myself, I'm not getting involved in this. But I did just want to point out that you have a bylaw, which is very strong, very clear on what the town administrator does. So perhaps during your comments, and you're working with the screen committee, these guys and your screening committee, you may want to take a look at that bylaw and see if that still works for you also.
Yeah, I think that's no, honestly, that's great value add. I mean, truly, like, that's what I was saying around re-baselining, is to just take a look now
That is
again
your
and say.
baseline right there, the bylaw,
Right.
which tells you what the responsibilities are of the town administrator and what the Board of Selectmen's responsibilities are. It's pretty clear.
Let's hope.
Yeah, a comment and a question. The comment is regarding developing the job description. I think there's definitely a need to work on that as well, because things have changed. When Ms. Craver started here, she didn't have the experience she has now, right? But over those years, she's evolved, and the role has evolved, and the people that work with her have also changed, and those roles have evolved. So what may have been right at the time, we didn't have a director of HR, we didn't have half the staff we have now, so there are definitely things that need to be changed as a part of that search process. My question is, in your packet, I thought was very thorough. Would it be fair for me to compare this, and I'm not sure if you have the experience, I'm hoping it might be similar in at least certain areas, to an assessment center that we've had done for like our last police chief, where it's not just, okay, we check your background, we read your resume, check your references, do background checks, but they also would hit them with real-life scenarios and would put them on the spot. This is happening, how do you handle this? This is happening, how do you handle that? Would you say, is that something that you?
We
part
did
of
an
your
assessment
process?
center for Lincoln with the town administrator there. We had an in-out box exercise. We had an extemporaneous writing assignment. And we had a major, Chamber of Commerce presentation that had to be made as part of it. So we did that with the screening committee. We limited it to the final 3 or 4 candidates. Screening committee liked it a lot.
Yeah. I think, because I think as we learned with the Police Chief Assessment Center, that process, I'm very glad to hear you included that, was invaluable, especially, I think, in the feedback they got. And what I heard from all the candidates that went through it was grueling, but it was a rewarding experience for everyone that went through it as well. So it helped the town and it helped the candidates. Any questions from the other board members? If not, I'll pull some from here.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you have one?
So just a quick question.
You do?
Through your searches, how many people have you found that really don't have town administrator experience, but they have had enormous experience in town governments and being department heads of various different departments? How many people have you put forward in that, in that category?
Well, we don't limit the recruitment to only experienced administrators and managers. If we are aware of public administrators, regardless of their position or title, that would be good candidates, we think would be good candidates, we'll approach them. We'll encourage them to apply. And I've done that in the past. The search is open in the sense that the advertisement is available on the different websites and your own town website and the brochures that we put out. But you're right, there are some very effective administrators at department levels. In my own community right now, in Chatham, the police chief has served as an acting town manager any number of times when the manager's been on vacation or when she is occupied with some other responsibility. I've had public works directors working for me whom I would strongly encourage to be a town administrator and manager. A finance director I had in a couple of communities would have been much better town managers than a number of managers that I know. Yeah. And so I think we've got to keep an open mind on it. And if there's talent out there, if they have the basic skills and knowledge of the position and the managerial skills, they ought to be brought forward. And that, by the way, would apply even if they're not in the public sector. I know some communities, when they have a turnover, they say, let's consider business people. That's fine. The only caveat there is the public participation in the day-to-day activities of the board and the selectmen and the manager and the administrator and department heads. It can drive a person who's had only private business experience, they drive them up the wall, drive her up the wall.
Yeah, I could never work for David. That would just never happen.
You have to have a high
I'm
level
a
of...
very good boss, just so you know.
Yeah, that's right. It's a tough job sometimes.
Just quickly to add, 20 years ago, the competition was pretty fierce. There were a lot of candidates, a lot of experienced candidates. Over the last 5 years, the inventory of people interested has really contracted, and recruiting is much more difficult. So before, when we'd see 1 or 2 department heads apply for a job, out of maybe 100 applicants, now we see anywhere between 4 and 6. They range from, public works directors to planning directors, to former selectmen, actually. And, some of them make great candidates. It's a really tough recruiting pool out there right now. We are seeing younger people come into the profession, but during the 90s, there weren't a lot of young graduate students interested in the profession and coming into it. So you're experiencing that little twinge there.
If I could play off of that for 1 minute, and then I know Ms. Buick had a question, because this will actually save me mine later. One of the questions was, and I'm not going to ask you for this answer, but you provided an overview, let's do this right. You provided an overview of the process of the search and the proposal. Expand for us on how you will ensure finding an individual with a combination of knowledge, experience, and cultural fit for the town of Charlton and where we may be headed. And I'm just reading that because I think it fits with the comment you just made. What I found in private sector is that sometimes, for me, the best fit didn't have all that experience, but they had the capability, and we could train them and they could grow, but they had the fresh outlook, they had the drive, and for me personally, I think I would take the same approach here. Sure, I would love to have experience and knowledge, and as much of it as I can get. But I don't want that, for me, to trump fit for the community if that person, or if there is a candidate that the recruitment firm found was a fit, which to me is very important. We may be one of the largest towns in the state, landmass-wise, but we're still a very small town. And I think we have a very vague and vibrant community, and having the person who fits that community. I think as long as they have enough experience and knowledge, but they show that they have the ability to grow with the town and take us where we need to go and grow with us, I think would be an important thing for me. Ms. Spivak, you had a question?
I would like to know how many repeat customers you've had.
How many?
How many repeat customers? How many times have you gone back, say we hire you, and then,
Let me take a stab at that. I've had a number of contracts or engagements with communities as an acting manager, writing a charter with the Charter Commission of the community, going back later and assisting with the board with the conversion of the form of government. The one that stands out is Bourne. Bourne was the first town to change over from a full-time 3-member elected board of selectmen to part-time 5-member elected board with the town administrator. And I did the charter for Bourne, and the selectmen were not keen on having a charter at all, but the citizens said Charter Commission, and they pushed through a charter, and I worked with the Charter Commission. When the Board of Selectmen objected strongly to the whole concept of a charter, after the charter was approved by the voters, I get a call one day from the Board of Selectmen, asked me to come in and talk to them, and I went in, and their first comment to me was, all right, you did all this damage in our town. Now you're going to help us find an administrator. And I was shocked. And I stayed there about 5 months, I guess, as the acting administrator, trying to coach these 3 full-time salaried selectmen on the new role, because it also required a new vote to elect 2 new members or 5 new members to the board. I've done repeats in other communities, in Nantucket, charter kind of studies and organizational studies, or working with the town administrator on personnel matters. On the Cape, because I'm located on the Cape, it was easy to get back and forth. And I worked a number of times with Wellfleet, Yarmouth, Dennis, on searches and studies. I was manager in Duxbury, and they engaged me years later to come back and help with the recruitment. So I've had a number of repeat opportunities, and I'm proud to say that I enjoy it. I don't always get called back, but I think the record would indicate, and I think the listing of towns that I've been involved in would show that I've been involved in a number of repeat engagements.
Just quickly, most recently, 18 months ago, we did a recruitment for the town administrator in Belmont. 6 months later, they asked us to help recruit their light department manager. And just recently, they asked us to do their police chief recruitment, which we're currently doing right now.
Rick probably doesn't remember, but I did one of the first studies in Belmont where the League of Women Voters encouraged the Board of Selectmen to hire a town administrator. They didn't want a town administrator. I was at that time working at Middlesex Community College, and a consultant who didn't have time to work in Belmont called me up and says, would you please go to Belmont and work with their selectmen, which I did, and the selectmen finally engaged me to do a study of the town government. And they had no administrator, they had no executive secretary, and a 5-member board of selectmen, very competent people. And they told me to work with the secretary, their secretary to the board. And so I could only go in on Saturdays because I'm working full-time myself. So the first time I go in to meet with the secretary, she gave me the key to the town hall and said, I don't have time to come in here on Saturday and open the town hall for you. You keep this key until you finish the study. Just don't let the police see you opening town hall on a Saturday morning. But they did hire an administrator, and they went through 2 or 3 different administrators over the next 20 years or so. But
They didn't give me a key.
All right. I have 2 more questions from this for you, unless anyone else does. I will say that
What do you think? Come on.
for anyone who may ask later, just so you know, most of the questions that we are asking are, in effect, follow-up questions, because we got your RFP, right, the proposal you sent in, which I personally thought was very, very thorough. It took me a while to go through it, and I was very pleased with that. So these are mostly follow-up type questions. But one I do want to ask is, will your team consist of anyone not mentioned in the proposal or here this evening? And if so, who would they be, and who will be the lead on this project?
Rick was going to be the lead on the project. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I do now.
Yeah.
Occasionally, for references, I use Fred Ryan of Ryan Associates. Fred was the former Arlington Police Chief. He does background investigations, does very thorough reference reviews. He's a classic cop. He visits neighbors and talks to relatives and does a thorough investigation. Unoccasionally, so if we use anybody other than the 2 of us, it would be Fred, just to do the references.
Okay. And then my last question would be, if we did decide to utilize your experience to assist with developing a performance review process and evaluation tools, what would other fees be for that?
What would the fee be?
I assume that's additional fees.
Yes. Well, I've taken a look at the one that appears in your policy on the website. It's a little short, and
You can be blunt, it's okay.
it's a little lacking. I've developed some in the past. When I left Dennis, they asked me to develop the performance review for my successor, believe it or not. So, I mean, it wouldn't kill you. It wouldn't be, I'd really have to cost it out.
Okay.
Um,
Fair enough.
It wouldn't be significant, but we'd be using a lot of the information that we glean from you and from the process as part of it, as the straw man to give you. You know, we believe that performance reviews should be crafted each and every single year based on the goals that you have for the manager. And the questions should be specific. Just as an example, you've got some employee relations category, and it's just blank. That, you know, from a manager's standpoint or an administrative standpoint, it doesn't mean much. And any selectman could make up any issue or accolade that they wanted based on the limited knowledge that they have. But if you have goals specifically around employee relations and what you want the town administrator to do to establish them, and you ask specific questions in your performance review related to those goals, and you answer them honestly, then you're actually helping each other, you know, evaluate, make an assessment of the skill set and the growth areas that your professional has. And that is, you know, much more crafted and specific. The framework, you know, you can use forever, but I think each and every single year, for a manager, for an administrator, you have to revisit the evaluation and tie it to the goals and the objectives that you have for the person, and you have to ask specific questions. And the selectmen have to own some of the issues there too. I mean, if there are some obstacles that were placed in front of the administrator's way, either through politics or by delay, you know, those are one of the questions that you ask and make sure that gets addressed in a performance review so that it's fair, and, you know, you begin to establish a decent, wholesome, trusting relationship with the professional you have. But again, it's not a huge lift, and, you know, I'll just regret, if I gave you a number, I'd regret it.
Actually, I'm gonna say, hey, you know what, we already just got advice, and he's not gonna bill us for it later. It was great advice, though, already.
And through the chair, I just want to remind everyone, quite a while ago, we voted to move forward. You know, I'm working with our HR director on the TA evaluation, and I think it's been very fluid, but we would be able to provide some kind of a template. I think what the board at the time decided was to incorporate, along with some of the things actually I think that you're suggesting, more of a 360 in there to get more feedback. But again, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but it's a great question to find out how much that would be,
Hey,
David.
I'm going on the questions provided,
If I-
Again,
so.
the best thing you can do for a manager is to have them get anonymous 360 feedback from their employees, and for you to stay out of it. And for you to have the manager come back to you, give you an overview of the feedback that he or she got, and to give you a plan of how they're going to address it.
And since I have the microphone, I will ask through the chair, you touched on marketing tools. Could you tell me a little bit more about what you do to market? And I know you're now getting more familiar with the Worcester area, and you're kind of more the other part of the state. And as we know, it's that personal ask or that network that you build. And so how much time do you spend on the phone speaking to people or versus developing a brochure or advertising, you know, an MMA, or if you can kind of break that down, I'd appreciate it.
Well, Tom can speak for himself. I like to get a good feel for what's needed first, so I can talk to people. Both Tom and I worked in Massachusetts for a long time. I worked in Lexington for 20 years, and I had one of the nation's best internship program. I probably have about 40 people that have worked for me that are now managers or assistant managers someplace, somewhere in the United States. So I rely on that first network alone just to get referrals. Then both Tom and I were members and officers in MMA and MMMA, and we have a network of managers that we know and go, and I take every opportunity. I don't see Robin's name on the listserv very often. On the listserv that the Worcester County managers have, where they ask each other questions and feedback, to try to make an assessment of who I see, what they see, what I see, what type of questions they ask, how they answer the questions that their peers have. And it's a nice way for me to get to know them. And I've already reached out to a couple of them just to try to get to know them a little better. And essentially, that's the way I go about recruiting. And then, we do advertise, in the we suggest that you advertise in the ICMA newsletter and the MMA Beacon. And as the resumes come in, we're constantly recruiting and talking to the people as they come in. It's a lot easier to do that as soon as you get something than it is to wait for them to pile up and then have some arbitrary deadline that you have to fit.
I would add the fact that bid managers have applied for positions ourselves, have worked with other managers, either as their bosses or as assistants to them as we've moved through our own career. We developed this network of contacts that, at least in my case, it's always surprising me when I get an email or a phone call from someone who says, I know so-and-so and so-and-so. I got an email 3 days ago from a gentleman out of state, but he told me that a former assistant of mine when I worked in New York, who became a professor at Rockefeller College, I think you know him, Bob McAvoy, had recommended he contact me because he wants to locate in Massachusetts. So I'm out of the blue, I'm receiving these resumes from people. As a result of the contacts I've made and personal contacts I've had over the years, it's encouraging to know that your name is sitting out there and people are willing to call you and say, would you consider me? Of course, just because they reference somebody I used to know, I don't take their resume on blind faith. I will look at it carefully and say, well, I don't know if I want to recommend you, but the word of mouth, name recognition, experience and contacts over the years, I think, is what gives us the edge in terms of contacting people, finding out who's in the market, who's ready to move on, who may be ready to apply but doesn't want to jeopardize their existing position. And we can often give that kind of a person cover by saying, hey, I was approached by the recruiter. I'm really happy where I am, but I can't ignore this opportunity. So that's part of our role, too.
We also look at the candidate as our client, too. We spend a lot of time with the candidates. We try to prep them for the interviews. Robin will tell you there's very rarely a question that you get as an administrator or a manager that you're not ready for. It's really who you are, what you have to offer, and how you explain it, and how you lay out who you are. And our job is to try to get the candidates to be the best candidates they can be, so you can see them at their best. And I also think that's what differentiates us a little bit. We also will ask people we're recruiting to talk to clients, customers, candidates that we've tried to recruit before, even some that haven't gotten the job, because we view them all as customers, and that's a little different approach than some.
My last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is you provided a recruitment schedule at the back of the packet, for which I am very grateful. But my question is, how rigid is that schedule? I think it goes out about 18 weeks. How flexible is it? Can we, if we wanted to expedite it, could we without sacrificing, quality?
It's a proposed schedule to give you an idea of the steps that we go through and the time on the 18-week schedule that we devote to each of those steps.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a draft, and it needs to be refined and agreed to by the Board of Selectmen. And if you want it to be shorter or longer, to allow for more opportunity or speed the process up, that's something that we would want to work with the board on.
I think, I speak for myself, but I would hope the rest of the board would agree. We're more concerned with doing it right than fast.
Yes, absolutely.
So, if it was 18 weeks, great, 10 weeks, if it was 30 weeks, I'd rather have the right candidate.
Agreed.
Yeah, because I think there are a lot of qualified people, even in town hall and surrounding areas, who could step in and help us
If needed.
as an interim, if that were the case.
If
So,
needed.
yeah.
We'd rather do it right.
We do like to adhere as much as possible to a fairly tight schedule, because once candidates apply, either because we encourage them to or because they're ready to apply, they're in the market. And good ones are going to go fast. And
That could be good for us.
we want to be ready to identify those people and not delay the process so much that we lose an outstanding candidate because of an
Yeah, I
arbitrary
don't
date.
think you'll find that anyone here wants to delay. We just want to make sure right
Do it right.
trumps speed. That's all. And if we do it quicker, so much the better. Bill?
I'll start through you. If you could briefly, speak to me regarding your upfront vetting process. I know you obviously, after you advertise, word of mouth, et cetera. For example, how much do you look at people's social media presence? How much do you take a look at other newspaper articles written about them? Because quite frankly, I don't want to see anything come across my desk where that I can look up in 30 seconds and say, why did you send this person to me? So how does that process work?
I Google. I go to social media sites. Sometimes you're really surprised by something.
But that definitely is a significant part of your upfront vetting.
Yes, we have to assume that these people are active on these sites, or their friends are, or what they're doing is, even if it's just personal stuff. In fact, especially if it's personal stuff.
Exactly.
And we need to see that so that you're not embarrassed, or that we're not embarrassed by some candidate that we should have known about if it just simply picked up the phone or opened a newspaper in their community. But we will,
That's exactly.
I want to expand on that.
We want to avoid
Well,
situations we've
we
had
have
in the
a-
past with employees making posts on their Facebook walls that were embarrassing to their departments.
We have several release forms that we ask each candidate when we get serious about them to release. And we do try to get on social media as much as we can to see what we see about a candidate. But once we're serious about them, we ask them to release all of their social media accounts until allow us to have access. We have a form and they sign it. If they don't sign it,
Perfect. Thank you. And believe it or not, I actually don't have any more questions.
There's one thing I want to add on that.
He was actually pretty light tonight.
I know, this is, shocking.
If I could piggyback that point, after a candidate's name becomes public, that's an interesting phase too, because things comes out of the woodwork that you wouldn't find sometimes.
Some true, some not.
And that's, if the person has been successful where they have been, or been there for a little while, they're going to have stepped on toes to do their job properly. And all of a sudden, when their name becomes public, those toes have a way of popping up in emails to the Board of Selectmen in particular. or phone calls, that kind of information. So we caution the board members in particular, once names are public, to be aware you may receive that kind of stuff. And if you do, you should let the consultant be aware of it so they can track down that information and verify how important it is, how valid it is, whether it's just a disgruntled town resident who was offended in some innocuous way, or a serious issue that needs to be addressed.
And a reader can look at, an article from 6 months to 6 years ago and see what they want to see in the article. And it's really up to us to figure it out. And you people know as well as anybody that a really good and competent and able administrator doing work for the board with direction of the board can find themselves in, a political controversy just because they were strong, they did their job, and they were competent. And it's really up to us to help define the situation and the circumstance.
Context is key.
Yes.
I'm out. I'm good.
Well, if there are no other questions from the board, Ms. Craver, I guess we would go on to number 5.
Thank so much.
6.
Appreciate
Do you
it.
want to have them hold on a minute?
Yeah, you
Because
might-
no-
yeah.
Number 5 is still part of this.
Yeah, you guys want to hang over
I
10
think
minutes?
you would just ask if the board has any
Yeah.
action.
Any inclination from the members of the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Borowski?
so for those who aren't familiar, and I think, David and Karen and others intimated it, that we put out an RFP, we received multiple entries, we reviewed them. Without naming names, I thought some were much better than the others. I will say that Grew White was one of my top 2. I won't say which one they ranked. Personally, I am very pleased with not only the RFP, but the fact that you were able to answer everyone's questions tonight, including mine that are sometimes off the wall. That was quite tame tonight. But personally, I feel very comfortable with this firm. And I think based upon our time frame, based upon the gentleman's experience, and again, especially with the detailed RFP of what we can expect, and that willingness to interact both as individual members of this board, but as a board as a whole, I'm very comfortable with the process, as obviously with the other 4 members, as we tweak it to our like. So I am more than willing to go forward tonight and make a motion to start the negotiation / process with Grew White.
I'll second it.
So we have a motion and a second.
I think the motion would be to appoint them as your search firm.
Oh, you want to say it like that?
And authorize me to put together a contract for you.
Sure, so,
And then you
Do it
can
again.
get
You know what?
going.
so moved. What Rob said.
So moved on. So
That's
moved on the
that's the
second.
easy way out.
It's not my
So-
first rodeo.
So we have a motion and a second, and I will add, because I think it's safe to say, and fair, it's honest, that the RFPs, we put out an RFP, RFQ?
Sorry, that's my fault.
RFP, whatever. All the responses we got, there were at least 5 or 6 of them. But the 2 that were invited tonight were unanimous. So the fact that Grew White is here is because it was a unanimous decision by the board that everyone felt you were among the top ones. We got responses back that I felt were woefully inadequate, and I think some members agreed, like, why are you sending me this? And then there were others that were very thorough. Yours was one of those. So, as I alluded to earlier, a lot of our questions were answered just from your response to our RFQ. I call it an RFP. But, corporate world.
It's a hybrid.
so-
Yeah, that's what we do, I don't know.
But, so, that being said, if there are any other comments, hearing none. Oh, there is one. These guys are thinking we're never getting out of here.
So through the chair, first I want to thank you for being here tonight. I too was very impressed by what you submitted and your answers tonight. But we are missing a member tonight, and,
That member reached out to me.
okay,
That member is fine. That member could not attend. There are issues going on right now,
okay.
and they understand.
And with all due respect to everyone here, I would like to interview one other. I know I may be in the minority, and that's perfectly okay, but I just think, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and we looked at others, and there was so, I'm not, again, you were in my top two as well.
Mhm.
But remember the whole thing about not rushing, folks? Just saying.
Through the chair, I will say, just speaking for myself, and obviously I would actually love to hear other members, that my top two, the top 40%, were far and away the top two that I was most interested in. So, again, I know exactly where you're coming from, and I think it makes sense. It's just, it would be hard pressed for me, without obviously naming names, because I don't want to go down that path, to endorse to candidate number 3 to come in unless there was unanimous approval to say, yes, this is a great idea. Because again, I think the top 2 were far and away. That, again, that's just me.
Through the
So-
chair, I would tend to agree with Bill. I think the scores that the top 2 received when we did the worksheet were far and above number 3 that we would bring in. I think just sitting here tonight, even after reading the documentation that they sent us, I think that it would be just an exercise to bring in a second firm. That would be my.
So, and so, I concur, and I absolutely respect Ms. Spiewak's position and concern, and I think, for me, again, to go along with Mr. Borowski, I don't want to name names of other firms, but I would have been inclined, I think, to have pursued that path with you if number 3 was even, in my own opinion, remotely close to number 1 and number 2. But there was a significant drop-off in the quality of the responses to the RFQ. And for me, number 1 and 2 were clearly head and shoulders, and then there was a significant drop-off. And so I think for me personally, because of that, I'm not inclined to go with someone that out of the gate I thought was subpar, just for the sake of having them in. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion or comments or direction? No. In that case, then, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Sorry. She's not going either way. So-
I respectfully disagree, and again, nothing against anyone here. You kind of went a little fast.
Sorry. I'll slow down, I'll slow down. All those in favor,
Aye.
please say aye.
Aye, I will support.
Opposed, there's no one left. Chair votes aye, motion carries unanimously.
We look forward to
So-
working with you.
Same here.
We're looking forward to it.
Yes.
Don't worry, Tom and I have been through thousands of meetings, and we've seen it all.
Well, we're an interesting bunch, so there you go.
Yeah, I'll be even more demanding, so yeah, this was nothing.
So,
Well, I
through
appreciate
the,
it, and looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.
So Ms.
Through the
Craver
chair.
will,
I will work with them to get the contract ready for
Yep.
you, present that, and then I will be stepping back from your process, and HR will start to assist you as a staff person in those deliberations.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll still be asking questions down there.
Thanks,
No
Thanks,
worries.
appreciate it. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
If you want to suck up, I'm a big Diet Mountain Dew guy. Just throwing it out there.
that's okay. That being said,
Before they leave, can I ask one more question? See, they still have time.
we already voted.
Honestly, so am I, so I can't say. Like,
So, the next is your next meeting, and I am recommending that you have a workshop next week.
I was gonna read that.
At
Go ahead.
some point, you know, we
Yes.
started talking about summer opera
Yeah,
salaries.
you
I
know
don't
what?
think that's gonna
The
work.
next person who
So-
comes into this town has to understand the meaning of a summer schedule. She's had us here every
Yeah.
single week.
some towns it's once a month. Our town is twice a week, but
I
that's fine. I
know,
mean, that's,
so, yeah.
So, I guess I'm wondering, assuming that we can get the contract done and
Mhm.
everything, is there some action step that you want for next week, or that they can have ready for your consideration next week? Because as part of, what I'd
Well-
like to do next week, if you will, is start with you with a transition and start going through some of the projects.
yes.
If it was ready, I
but-
think one of the requirements would be, and I think we need input from the members, but definitely a fresh look at the job description because so much has changed.
The job description and the bylaw for, maybe just for
Yeah.
together.
Job description bylaw, every other piece of news that you'd be able to find on Charlton to
So-
fulfill some of our challenges.
I guess I'd ask, what is the first steps that you do, so we can figure out in planning the meetings how to move this
Well, the first
forward?
thing we do is get in touch with you and ask if your personnel, your HR person could schedule meetings with department heads. And we would
Okay.
sit down immediately and start interviewing
You would do that before anything else with the
before
board?
anything else.
Okay.
Then, and we can do that in anticipation of a contract. We'd ask you to start thinking about people in the community who would like us to interview. Interviews will last anywhere between 20 minutes and a half an hour.
It's funny, because the answer to that is no one and everyone.
The other thing that they need to do is to decide on a search committee.
Yes.
So
We can
they
give
could
you a-
put that advertisement out starting right away if they,
We have a
That's
charge somewhere we can forward.
If we get
Okay.
recommendations.
Yeah.
that-
so
that
maybe
wasn't
that's the one
successful,
thing you could
Yeah.
do, is
Best
make that
practice.
decision.
The
to
charge
get
is
that going.
important. The board needs to make clear to the search or screening committee what their role is.
Yep.
Because, we'd be working with them a lot, but we want to be sure that our work with you isn't compromised in any way by whatever we're doing with the search committee. So the charge is important, that it be adopted by the Board of Selectmen.
So
Maybe
you
we
have
discuss
sample
that on
charges
Tuesday.
and
Yeah.
sample forms, and then they could take a look and put some together?
Yeah, that's what I'm
That'd be
thinking.
By
helpful.
Okay.
forms, I'm not sure what you mean,
A form, just as a form, not as in writing form, but form as in the forum. Who would be on, who would be good?
What's the composition?
choices?
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, we can give you that.
X amount of residents,
So
X amount
is
of
it-
department heads.
is it
but.
Finance
No more than
committee.
9, no fewer than 7.
So 8.
No, we can't have an even number.
I know, I
I
know.
did send you guys.
You know,
to
yeah.
that.
What's a standard makeup, i.e. department
That's
heads,
what it is.
number of residents, things like that. So anything that you can forward on to us, I'd love to be able
Upfront.
to discuss that next Tuesday, to be able to say, here's what we're
I'm
thinking.
happy to come to your meeting Tuesday to talk about.
That'd be helpful.
That'd be good. if we
Yeah,
could
that'd be
get
helpful.
that.
Okay.
And
That's good.
I do have one very important question, and perhaps I just didn't see the information regarding payment and fees. How do you bill out? Is it a third, and a third, half?
We bill out by
yeah.
each phase. So
Like tasks
1/4
completed?
of it goes when the first phase is completed, then another 1/4 at the second, and the third, and then the fourth.
She was hoping you were going to say you work for free, but okay.
We almost do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin's
Thank you very
gonna,
much.
she'll be in touch with you on your HR, and we will be meeting on the 13th, I guess.
Robin, thank you for that.
So, Ms. Craver, next meeting, number
I see
7.
them heading out with HR, so they're already
Oh,
getting
is it work
started.
So we will
Yes, sir.
ask you to schedule that meeting.
Thank you.
Make sure they are pleased on it, so we can discuss the makeup of the committee, the search committee.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And also, and discuss their charge and their duties.
The transition plan, and then, again, knowing timing. Again, we can talk more about it in the week, but I think very quickly, we need to start talking around the appointment of a interim TA.
If needed.
If needed,
If
and we
needed.
have to discuss, actually, that's what we have to
If
discuss,
needed.
if we're going to do
Yeah.
that, right? So, and this, I think I did mention the recruitment schedule in the back. I found it very helpful,
Yeah, yeah.
guideline, so, yeah.
Just as a reminder, Robin has less than 2 months, unless we decide to extend, just throwing it out there, so.
Thank
we need to- Just throwing it out there. In fact, I believe I have a project on October 1st due, and it's 56 days away. Not that it's
Wow.
counting, just saying.
My project should do every day.
Paper.
We were for a daily. Okay, well,
Motion adjourned.
Second. How's that, Bill?
John?
We're going to debate it?
the lightning round.
Yeah.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries unanimously. We are adjourned, and we will be returning
Pete,
next
thank you.
Tuesday, the 13th.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Peter.
And